Welcome to the Kansas 4-H Horse Safety Webinar. I'm Kelsey Nordyke, your Kansas 4-H Ag Science Specialist and Regional 4-H Specialist. Today's webinar is intended to give our 4-H Horse Project members who intend to exhibit at the Kansas State Fair the opportunity to learn correct safety techniques as well as good sportsmanship. Let's begin. These may look like really fun ways to mount your horse or to act around your horse, but they're not the most safe. And so we want to make sure that we're teaching you good techniques to be good horsemen and safe horsemen. So today we're going to discuss an introduction. We're going to talk about correct and safe attire. We're going to discuss how to correctly approach your horse, lead your horse, safe haltering and tying, moving around your horse safely, saddling, mounting, good sportsmanship in the warm-up pen and the arena, and then we'll end with a conclusion. Because horses are prey animals, they respond rapidly to disruptions in their areas. They're sensitive to sights, sounds, touch, and movements, and they're quick to recognize and respond to danger by fighting, fleeing, or bunching together. This response or this behavior is known as fight or flight, and it has allowed horses to survive in the wild. As we work with and are around horses, it's important that we understand their behavior for our personal safety, as well as the safety of other riders and other horses. Let's begin discussing correct attire or safe attire that we want to wear when we're working with our horse. Sometimes when we're working with our horse at home, we might get a little lax on what we wear and how we work around them, but we want to make sure to keep you safe at all times. And so it's important that we wear good safe attire. So we're going to start from the ground up. We're going to wear boots or closed-toed shoes to protect our feet. Horses are big animals and they can be dangerous. When they move quickly, they can step on us and that can cause injury. And we want to make sure that we're protecting our feet. It's important to wear pants when you're working with your horses and protect your legs, as well as well-fitting clothing. So you never want to wear anything that's loose or baggy that could get hung up or tied or torn. An optional safe equipment would be a helmet. Now, the helmet is required for all of our 4-H horse members who wish to exhibit in the hunter hack classes at the Kansas State Fair. However, we also must make sure that we are wearing a safe helmet. So a safe helmet should be one that fits well. It fits snugly down on the rider's head. It's also ASTM certified or SEI approved. And according to our Kansas 4-H Horse Show rulebook, it must have a manufacture date within the last 5 years. The helmets will be checked during the safety check at the Kansas State Fair. And if your helmet does not meet the specifications, you will not be allowed to exhibit in the hunter hack class. Incorrect attire, of course, would include flip-flops, Crocs, or open-toed shoes, shorts, or loose or ill-fitting clothing. And here are some examples of those. Now, your boots do not have to be Western boots, but you do need to wear boots. And according to our 4-H dress code, you are required to wear boots, either English or Western, pants, and a long sleeve shirt. Our 4-H'er here is exhibiting how to safely approach and halter her horse. Notice that she speaks calmly and she moves calmly and slowly and approaches the horse toward the horse's shoulder. She puts the crown piece around the horse's neck and then proceeds to put the halter on by pulling it over the horse's nose next. Notice that our horse's eyes are on the sides of their head. They're not in the front. This is what indicates that our horses are prey versus predator. Eyes on the side like to hide and eyes in the front like to hunt. And so our horses see things to the sides of them and they have a visual blind spot directly in front of and directly behind them. So as we approach our horses, it's important that we approach at an angle and toward the shoulder. Never approach directly from behind your horse and never run at your horse from any direction. Remember, we talked in the beginning of the webinar about the fact that horses respond quickly to sights, sounds, or disruptions to their environment. Running quickly at your horse could startle them and could cause serious injury to you and or the horse or other horses around. Let's look at some unsafe approaches. Now, we're really lucky that this horse is pretty broke and pretty calm. However, notice that this exhibitor runs up to her horse. And even though the horse is pretty calm, he does get a little bit startled. When she first runs up to him, he pins his ears and he starts to turn to the side and walk away from her because he is using that flee instinct, that flight instinct to get away from a situation that he's uncomfortable with. Again, we're lucky that this horse is calm and safe. This exhibitor walks right up to the horses behind. He can't see her until she's right next to him and she touches him. And a horse that might be startled by a noise as you walk up could potentially back over you, could bolt, could kick, and this is just really an unsafe situation. When we approach our horses and when we halter them, it's important that if we're using that rope halter, the rope type halters, that we are tying them correctly. There is a correct way and an incorrect way to do this. And it's not just an instance of what's right and what's wrong or what someone prefers over another person. To ensure that your horse is safe when you're using a rope halter, make sure the end of that rope is below the loop of the halter. If the knot is above the loop, you may not be able to untie the knot, especially if your horse sets back on that halter and tightens that knot. So I'm going to give you just a minute to look at the diagram here and see the correct way to tie the rope halter. Notice in picture 3 that that knot is below the loop of the halter. Now let's look and see what incorrect looks like. So notice here that the knot of the halter is up above the loop. So we're looking at this knot here and this loop here. The knot is up here versus down here below the loop. If this horse were to be tied to something and to get startled and set back, it would tighten that knot and it would be really difficult to get the halter off of the horse without cutting it. As we're discussing halters, when we're in showmanship, oftentimes we use a showmanship halter with a chain. So let's discuss the proper way to do this. So you want to start the chain running through the side ring of the halter on the horse's left side, so on the left side of the horse's face. You're going to run it under the horse's chin and attach it to the opposite side ring or further up where the crown piece attaches. So depending on the length of your chain, you could attach it here. But her chain is pretty long, and so it's attached up here to the ring. I want you to also notice that the clip is turned to the outside, and so the rough part of the clip is not rubbing up against the horse's face. And if the horse would be to left to where it could rub its face, it's not going to disconnect that chain. An incorrect way to attach a chain to your halter would be to run it in the ring underneath the chin strap and hook it back to itself. This creates a loop that could get hung up on something, or the horse could accidentally step through it if it scratches its head on its leg. And so we always want to make sure that we're not running this chain back on itself. If you're a 4-H'er whose horse is not used to the chain and you're used to putting the chain through this way when you get to the horse show, I would encourage you to work with your horse at home with that chain under its chin. Also work on keeping soft hands as you're working with the horse with the chain under its chin so it doesn't get startled and it's used to that pressure. After we catch our horse, we're going to lead it, and we could potentially have to turn our horse. The correct way to lead your horse and the safest way to do this is from the horse's left side. You're going to walk at about the horse's throat latch or its shoulder, and your right hand is going to be about 15 inches away from the head of the horse, with your left hand holding the remainder of the lead neatly coiled into one large loop. As you're walking, keep your eyes forward, looking the direction that you're going. You might notice that when you're not looking where you're going, you tend to drift off to the direction that you're looking. That's why it's really important to look where you're going. The incorrect way to carry your lead or lead your horse would be to have the lead coiled tightly around your hand, either your right hand or your left hand. And this is unsafe because if your horse would bolt, that lead would tighten very quickly around your hand. It could potentially pull your fingers off. It could cause injury to your hand. And I know firsthand several people who have had fingers pulled off because they either led their horse with their fingers through the ring on the halter or their hand got caught up in that lead. So always make sure that you carry that lead with one hand on, with your right hand on the lead closest to the horse's face, and the remainder of the lead in one large loop. Another incorrect way would be to have your excess lead dragging on the ground, and to not be looking where you're going. Let's watch as this 4-H'er correctly leads her horse. Notice that she's walking about even with his throat latch. She's got about 12 to 15 inches of lead between her right hand and the horse, and the extra lead is carried in a large loop in her left hand. She's also looking in the direction that she's walking. In this example, she doesn't even hold on to the lead with her right hand part of the time. She's looking all over the place. The excess lead is dragging on the ground and it's getting tangled up in her legs. It could also potentially get tangled up in the horse's legs or even stepped on by the horse. And so we want to make sure that we're not dragging that excess lead. When we turn a horse, when we're leading, there is a safe way and an unsafe way to do this. If you are turning your horse more than 90 degrees, so more than 1/4 of a turn, you always push the horse away from you. This prevents the horse from running over you if it were to get startled or spooked and bolt. Incorrectly would be to pull the horse toward you when you turn. If your horse would spook, it could run right over the top of you, it could step on you, it could potentially cause injury, and you generally just have less control. So in this example, you'll notice that this horse is correctly holding a pivot foot as she turns in. When we're just turning our horse, holding a pivot foot is not necessary. However, it's something that you might want to work on so that you perform better in your showmanship class. But notice that she is walking toward the horse. She's got her eyes where she's going. She's looking forward to the direction that she's turning. When we are pulling our horse on top of us, we're not really watching the direction we're going, and we really don't have good eyes on our horse to know what they're doing. Let's watch an incorrect example. So notice our exhibitor here is pulling the horse toward him. He's kind of watching where he's going, but he has no idea what his horse's body position is. And so it's really important that we make sure that we're watching where we're going, we're turning toward our horse, and we've got eyes on our horse. When our horse is haltered, it's important to know how to correctly tie them. And we need to make sure that we're tying them to a sturdy, immovable post or fence. Make sure that you're tying to an upright on a fence if you can, rather than a pole that is that's horizontal. Make sure that you're using a quick release knot and tying them at their natural head position. Additionally, when you're tying that quick release knot, it's important not to put the tail end of our lead back through the loop. I know that oftentimes we do this because our horses are pretty crafty at untying themselves, but if we drape that excess lead back through the loop, it's no longer a safe knot. You have to pull it back out of the loop in order to quickly release them if they were to set back or spook or need to be released quickly. Make sure that you tie them with enough slack that they're standing comfortably. Sometimes with our other species that we exhibit, we practice tying them high and tight, close to the fence. That's not what we need to do with our horses. And in addition to these things, make sure that you're only tying a horse that you know has been trained to tie safely. Here's the correct way to tie a safety knot. Notice that our exhibitor walks up to a sturdy, immovable fence. She's tying to an upright. Now, where she ties has to be a little bit above the horse's head, but she's tying with enough slack so that the horse can stand with his head in the natural position. This would be an example of an incorrect place to tie the horse. So there's lots of slack left here. The horse is tied well below his natural position and well below his withers. He could potentially step over this and get caught up in it. And it's just not a really safe, immovable place for him to be tied. It's also unsafe to leave your halter hanging, tied, and not attached to a horse. If a horse or something else could come by here, it could easily get caught up in the halter and cause injury and really cause a wreck. When our horses are tied, it's important to also know how to move side to side around them. Remember, horses have a visual blind spot directly in front of and directly behind them. And so, but they have great peripheral vision. They're able to see to the sides of them very easily. So it's important that we understand how they see and understand their behavior so that we can move around them correctly. Make sure that you approach near your horse's shoulder when you're moving from one side to the other. Run your hand along the side of your horse and maintain contact. And then you have two options for crossing behind your horse. Make sure that you're either running your hand over the rump and walking very closely to the back legs. In this instance, the horse may still try to kick, but it's going to hurt a lot less because they're not going to have enough momentum to kick you very hard because you're going to be right up next to them. Or make sure that you walk behind them well outside of kicking range. Incorrect ways to do this would to be walking directly up from behind your horse. So especially as our rider exhibited earlier when she approached directly from behind, walking within kicking range, or crossing under a tied halter in front of your horse. This is something that I see exhibitors do a lot, especially when they're super comfortable with their horses, but this just really is unsafe. So just imagine if you're crossing under your horse, when something startles them from behind, they could potentially strike you from the front or step on you or knock you down, and you could end up in a really unsafe situation and with injury. So in these series of pictures, we're going to watch how this person moves from side to side. Notice in this picture, she is well outside of kicking range. And so she's moving from one side of the horse to the other. She's within the horse's peripheral vision. He can see her. He knows where she's at. And she's safe because if he should decide to kick, she's not within kicking range. As she crosses over, she maintains that distance. And on this example, she's walked up to his shoulder already. She's run her hand along his body and is running it over his rump or over his croup as she crosses behind. And she's right up next to that horse. And so if he should decide to kick, he's not getting a lot of momentum before he would actually hit her. And so it wouldn't hurt as bad. And plus, maintaining that contact lets the horse know that she's there and he's less likely to kick. And she maintains that contact all the way around the horse. As we're preparing to ride our horses, we also need to pick up their hooves, and it's really important that we do this in a safe manner as well. So we're going to talk about correctly picking up both the front hoof and the back hoof. So again, always approach your horse toward the shoulder, and with your back to your horse's head, run your hand from his shoulder down the leg, and you're going to keep your knees just a little bit bent and pinch slightly above that fetlock. The fetlock is the kind of the big part of the horse's ankle. And if you don't know your parts of your horse, I would encourage you to go back and look and make sure you understand where the fetlock is. So you're going to pinch slightly above the fetlock until your horse will raise its foot. After you're finished cleaning the hoof, place the hoof down carefully away from your own feet. We're not going to just let the hoof fall. We're going to set it down gently. When we're picking up a rear foot, we're going to, again, approach the shoulder or the side. We're going to run our hand down over the horse's hip and down the hind leg with your back to your horse's head. You're going to pinch slightly above the fetlock until your horse raises its foot, and keep your body even with the horse's flank to avoid being in the kick zone. After you're finished cleaning the hoof, place it down carefully. And here are examples. Notice as this exhibitor begins cleaning her horse's hoof, she is always scraping away from her. She does this because the hoof pick may slip and could potentially hit her, and so it's always safer to scrape away from you. She always keeps her back toward the horse's head. She cleans out the horse's hoof. And then when she's finished, she's going to gently set that hoof down instead of just letting it fall. After we're done grooming our horses and getting them ready to ride, it's time to put on our saddle pad and our saddle, and we want to make sure we do this correctly so that it's comfortable and safe for us and comfortable and safe for our horse. The first thing we want to do is make sure that our pad is clean and free of debris. As you place that pad on your horse's back over his withers, make sure that there's enough space between the pad and the horse's withers so that your fingers can fit through. Make sure that the excess material of the pad is even around the saddle. This picture shows the pad correctly placed on the horse's back up on its withers. It's not too far up on his neck and it's not clear back on his back. And this will allow us to correctly place the saddle on the pad. Here are a couple of incorrect examples. On the left, you see the pad is too far up. So if we were to place the saddle on here, that saddle would not sit correctly on the horse's withers. It would be really uncomfortable and unsafe. And as we look at the placement on the right, the pad is too far back. Our cinch would be well behind where it's supposed to lie against the horse's body, and the saddle just would not sit correctly on the withers, and it would be an uncomfortable ride for both the horse and the rider, and potentially unsafe as our saddle could slip. So to correctly place your saddle, we're going to locate our horse's scapula or shoulder blade. You're going to feel for it with your fingertips while your horse is standing still, and you should be able to feel the muscle covered edge of the bone as it drops off toward the rear of the horse. Curl your fingers over it and you'll make a note of this position. And once you've done this several times, you'll have a good understanding of where this is and you won't have to feel every time. Place the saddle and the pad on top of your horse and keep in mind that that front concho of the saddle should be located right on top of or in line with the area where you curled your fingertips over your horse's shoulder blade. Double check that your saddle is placed correctly and note where the cinch lies as you tighten it. You should have about a hand's breadth of open space between your horse's elbow and where the cinch, the front edge of the cinch lies. You're also going to want to make sure that after you place that saddle, you lift up a little bit so that there is that space between your saddle pad and your horse's withers. Here's a couple of incorrect placements. Notice that the saddle on the left, well, you can tell that there's space between the horse's withers and the pad. That saddle is placed too far up on the horse's withers, and there's not enough space between the horse's elbow and the cinch. And on the right, the saddle is too far back. We have more than a hand's breadth between the horse's elbow and the cinch. Correct bit placement. So when we use two types of bits that we're going to address today would be the curb bit and the snaffle bit. When we correctly place a curb bit in our horse's mouth, there should be no wrinkles and the bit should lie against the corners of the horse's mouth. If we're using a snaffle bit, and again, this would be for our younger horses, 5 years and younger, a correctly adjusted snaffle should have about 1 to 2 wrinkles in the corner of the horse's mouth. And there is a safe and unsafe way to mount and dismount your horse. The first thing we're going to do is check the girth to make sure that it's appropriately tightened. Place the reins over your horse's neck, and you want to keep hold of them at all times so that you have control of your horse. Hold the reins in your left hand along with a chunk of the mane to prevent your horse from walking away. Stand with your back to your horse's head and turn the stirrup toward you, placing your left foot in the stirrup. Take a couple of bounces and pull yourself up using the saddle horn. Swing your right leg over the horse's rump and be careful not to kick your horse. Let yourself down gently into the saddle. To correctly dismount, stand in your stirrups, swing your right leg over your horse's rump again, being careful not to kick him, and keep your left leg straight. Stand in your left stirrup until your right leg is completely over the rump. Once both legs are on the left side of your horse, take your left foot out of the stirrup and slide carefully to the ground. Don't leave your left foot in the stirrup when you're sliding to the ground, because if your horse would spook or even move, you could get hung up in the saddle and potentially dragged. We're going to watch a couple videos of how to do this correctly. Notice that our rider checked her cinch first. She made sure that the girth was appropriately tightened, and then she begins to put the reins over her horse's neck, and she's always keeping hold of her horse. Next, she's going to turn that stirrup toward her and put her boot in it, and she's going to pull herself up onto her horse and over. And notice that she's careful not to kick her horse as she swings her right leg over. As we dismount, she's careful not to kick her horse. She kicks free of the stirrup and she drops to the ground. In this example, she leaves her foot in the stirrup. She's still got a hold of her horse, but if her horse were to move to the side, her foot could get hung up, she could fall, or she could be dragged. In the next section, we're going to talk about safety and sportsmanship in the warm-up pen, the makeup pen, and in the arena. These are some important things to take note of. And if your horse is not ready to correctly move in the arena during a riding class, the state fair may not be the best choice for you. And it might mean that you need a little bit more work at home. And that's okay. We're going to talk about some safety and sportsmanship. So here's some do's and don'ts. Always allow 1 to 1.5 horse lengths between horses. Be mindful of other exhibits in the warm-up pen, the makeup pen, and while you're in the arena for classes. This is for safety and good sportsmanship. If we're not being mindful of where others are, and we're in a class, we could cause them to have trouble in that class. We could cause their horse issues in the class, and we don't ever want to be the cause of someone else placing lower than where they should be. Think ahead. If you're on the arena rail, begin passing 1.5 horse lengths before the horse in front of you. As you pass the horse, then move back to the rail when you're 1.5 horse lengths past the other horse. And always make sure that you're looking ahead and looking behind you, especially if we're going to stop and back. We need to make sure we know what's behind us on the rail. Don't get too close when you're standing beside or behind another horse. Don't allow your horse to sniff another horse. Don't tailgate on the rail. Never get distracted. And make sure that you don't stop and back on the rail without looking where you're going first. In this video, our exhibitors are walking at a correct distance. There's about a horse length to 1.5 horses between the Palomino and the sorrel. And this keeps our exhibitor with the sorrel horse well outside of kicking range of the Palomino. Okay. In this example, our sorrel horse is following too closely. And this could result in our exhibitor leading the sorrel horse being kicked if the Palomino horse decides to kick out. When we're in the makeup pen or when we're in the halter ring, we want to make sure that we keep at least a horse length between our horses when we're standing and waiting. This is true when you're leading your horse. It's also true when you're riding. Notice the horses on the left are standing side by side in the makeup pen, and there's at least a horse length between them. If they were to be in a class, this would allow a judge to safely walk around their horses as well. On the right, our handlers are too close. The handler holding the palomino is well within kicking range, and if they were to be in a halter class or a showmanship class, this does not allow enough space for a judge to walk between the horses and adequately evaluate them. Never let unfamiliar horses sniff each other. Never let horses sniff each other when we're in the makeup pen or the warm-up pen. When we allow this, it could be followed by a kick or a bite or a strikeout. These horses seem pretty calm and relaxed, and so luckily these exhibitors are safe here. However, allowing their horses to sniff is an unsafe manner. In this video, our horses are correctly moving along the rail. There's at least a horse length or a horse and a half between them, and they maintain this at all times. Now, we know that your horses are not all going to move at the same speed. They have different leg lengths. Some legs move faster than the others, and some horses just naturally are quicker. So it's going to be necessary to do some things to maintain that safety along the rail. We'll talk about how to do that. So we want to make sure if we're moving up too closely to the horse in front of us, whether it's in the class or in the makeup ring, that we're passing correctly. So you don't necessarily need to slow your horse down. You just need to pass correctly. The paint horse in this example starts to pull away from the rail when he's 1.5 horse lengths behind the bay, moves far out from the bay to the inside of the rail, and then begins to go back to the rail when he's 1.5 horse lengths away from the bay. This is an example of tailgating. The paint is moving much quicker than the bay, and she's coming up on him. So notice that she tries to slow her horse down with her reins. However, she's still within the kicking range, and this creates an unsafe opportunity for both of our horses and our riders. This is an example of cutting off when passing. Notice that the paint moved out like she was supposed to originally, but then she moved in too close to the bay when she got back along the rail. This caused the rider of the bay to have to slow her horse, which is distracting and detrimental to her performance if they were to be in a class. Okay. So in this example, our bay rider stops and backs her horse on the rail without looking. This causes an unsafe environment for our rider on the paint, as she has to pull away from the rail to avoid being backed into. This would be appropriate to do whether you're in the warm-up pen or you're in a class. Always make sure that you look behind you when you're backing. To summarize, our horses are sensitive, curious animals. Understand the natural behavior of the horses. If you have a better understanding of how they naturally behave, you'll have a better understanding of how you should move around them and how you should work with them. Never stand directly behind or in front of your horse. Their eyes are on the side of their head, and so they have a natural blind spot directly in front of and directly behind them. They have great peripheral vision, but they don't see well directly in front of or behind them. Don't lead a horse while you're standing directly in front of or behind it. Always be aware of your surroundings because your horse is. Dress appropriately, pay attention, be cautious, and be courteous to other horses and riders. I'd like to thank our 4-H members and our 4-H volunteers and the Kansas State University Department of Animal Science for their assistance in providing video and photos for this webinar. And as a reminder, the last thing that you need to make sure you do after you complete this webinar is to complete the exam. A passing grade of 75% is required in order to exhibit at the Kansas State Fair 4-H Horse Show. And both the video and the exam must be completed by the time that you enter for the State Fair 4-H Horse Show. And we will be checking this. If you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to me, Kelsey Nordyke, and we look forward to seeing you at the Kansas State Fair.